Welcome to Nobilis Erotica, the best science fiction and fantasy erotica podcast in the known universe. This month's story, a woman's discovery of what turns her on. This is episode 445. I am your host, Nobilis Reed. This episode of Nobilis Erotica is sponsored by the generous patronage of Nobilis Erotica listeners. To help out paying the authors and voices that create these stories, visit patreon.com/Nobilis. The July patron-funded story is Accursed by Lynne Sargent. Lynne Sargent is a writer, aerialist, and philosophy PhD student. You can find her writing in venues such as Strange Horizons, Twisted Moon magazine, and Augur magazine, among others. She was also a 2018 Riesling and Aurora Award-nominated poet. To find out more about her or her writing, you can reach out on Twitter. She's at SamLynneS, or find a complete list of her works at scribbledshadows.wordpress.com. Our narrator, Lauren Harris, is an author, narrator, and traveling stenographer obsessed with stories about misfits who build their own belonging. Find her Spellhounds series on Amazon.com and her narration on Audible and many short fiction podcasts. Astute listeners will remember her as the narrator for the Incubus series by A.H. Lee. For more, follow her on Instagram at Lauren B. Harris, or sign up for her mailing list available at laurenbharris.com. Here we go.
Accursed by Lynne Sargent, narrated by Lauren Harris. It finally happens one night, as she's always been told it would. Sure, she thought that it had happened before, but she was mistaken. Haven't we all been? But no, this time it happens. They are in bed. It is a work night, and she is riding him again. They try to rotate positions for many reasons. Excitement, change, because the magazine told them to, so they feel like they should. It doesn't much matter to her, though. Mostly, they all feel the same. But not this time. This time the thunder cracks outside, and she feels herself crack with it. She is conjoined with him one moment. The next, she is sound. And now she knows what it is supposed to feel like. As it reverberates through her body, she keeps on plodding, rolling her hips over the valley between his thighs, until his face contorts the same way she supposes hers must have. How funny that he did not notice, that he still does not notice. But of course he is asleep before she is even dismounted. He snores, but that night it is the echoes of the thunder that she hears in her dreams. In the morning, there is a cup of coffee waiting for her on the table. He asks how she slept. Like a baby, she responds, and it is true. It felt so innocent, a cosmic innocence. But like the loss of childhood, like the loss of innocence, she does not know how she can go back. The second time it happens, they are camping. They are huddled inside their tent, away from the bugs and the wet. There is no space for anything but touch, and so they touch. It starts slow, like the rain started, gentle kisses on dry skin, slowly turning the world into a shower and the ground into mud puddles. Then it is knocked over battery-powered lamps and sleeping bags that are unzipped all the way to allow for maximum maneuverability. That is, until it becomes seizing limbs that touch the edges of the tent, sweaty flesh on canvas fabric, and then the water is everywhere, and not just of them. Somewhere out in the wilderness there is a cry. It is a cry that is an echo. Perhaps it is a moose in estrus. Perhaps it is the sound of two bears locked into a wrestling match. Regardless, it is also her. Her, discovering her body for the second time. "I've never heard you make that sound before," he says. Either she does not hear him, or she cannot yet form words. All she replies with is a gentle moan, her head turned to the side, her breath rippling the puddle that is now formed in the bottom of their tent. "Shit!" he exclaims, placing a hand into the puddle by accident as he shifts. "We should get out of here." He grabs her arm and helps her, still naked and shaking, to her knees. He has pulled on underwear, but she runs to the car naked. Her body feels as though it is missing something in moving so soon. She towels off in the back seat, carefully wiping away all the moisture, including that between her thighs. The rain drives down with urgency, and when she has awkwardly pulled her clothes on, she emerges from the car with an umbrella, holding it over him as he takes down the last of the tent. It is a long, wet drive home. They laugh a little. He has a small frown, a furrow in his brow as he drives, upset that their vacation has been cut short. She gently smiles and rests her hand on his leg. She lets her eyes slip out the window. They settle into a semi-comfortable silence as the rain drives down on the windshield, as she settles into the passenger seat, into her body, and echoes the whole way home. She started a conversation that now has turned into an argument. And of course it has, because he does not believe her. "You've come loads of times with me, though," he exclaims, frustrated. "This has nothing to do with it." He points a finger towards the window. "Well, I have, but only when it's raining out. It doesn't make sense. I don't know why." "No, before that." He shakes his head. "You must have." She shakes her head sadly. "I thought so too, until it happened." "How can you not have known what that feels like?" His eyes are incredulous. "It's not the same," she says softly, sadly. "You know how things are." She trails off meaningfully, trying not to remind him of the shame of the gender he bears. His eyes start to track a small circle, a roll, but he is stopped by her unwavering face and the honesty upon it. "It might just be a mental thing, you know?" he suggests. "It doesn't feel mental." She trails off, remembering the feeling of sound. She looks at him, opens her mouth to tell him, "Even if you don't believe me, can't you do it because I want you to?" But she is stopped by his well-meaning frown, the effort he is making that she has always known him to make. So she says instead, "Anyways, it doesn't mean I don't want you other times. Just, it's nice if we can when it's like this. Even if it is a mental thing, I would really like it." She smiles softly, shyly, through her eyelashes. Just like that, with her tone, she has ended the argument, and she has started something else. There is a moment, and a gust, and then there are limbs up against the window and sliding down it. There is sweat mixing with condensation, and there is the house that is now shaking like it is part of the storm. How can he not feel this? She thinks, even as she loses any hope of continuing the thought into speculation of an answer. Bodies have no answers. Here there are storms and there are droughts. There are not tonights, and there are please, I need yous. There are days that come in between nights and jobs that demand hands to fill them. It has been a drought, and she is weary of it. She is weary of it like she is weary of this day and weary of her students and of the drive home and of the home that she is driving to. But there are clouds on the horizon, and she can feel the pressure in the air start to dip. Inversely, she feels her spirits begin to rise. Maybe this will hold the rest of it at bay, if only for a moment. Sometimes all anyone needs is a moment. Traffic is bad, like it usually is on the commute home, but there is some sort of special vehicular horror that is born from the sulphurous steam of rainwater on asphalt at 5 p.m., like a witch's curse. The rain has started to come down before she has made it all the winding way home. The next 3 kilometers, 2 highway exits, yawn before her. She is slower than the sky, and this storm is a flash. She can tell. The breadth of the storm is not even so vast as this congestion, this marriage of bumpers and hoods, and the tires trysting with slick roads and angry drivers. She crawls towards the next exit, and her vehicle swerves with her mind, slowly. This is what service roads are for, she thinks to herself, not fully admitting the implications. The service road, too, is clogged, and so she turns again, searching for somewhere less traveled, no longer motivated by the traffic. She finds a spot in an empty lot under a tree. A trail stretches into the forest, and a sign stands beside it with intent. Hours, 8 a.m. to dusk, it reads. Hike at your own risk. She watches the rain come down and squints at the sign before deciding that no one will be hiking today. She turns the car off and settles into herself, cracking the window just a bit, enough to let a small sprinkle through now and then. Enough so she has the feel of something beyond her body and the metal box it is encased within. She exhales and lets her hand follow her breath, out and down below the waistline of her pants. She has not done this since she was a teenager. This part feels the same, but now she knows there is an ending to it, that there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow to find. Eventually the rain ends, and the hum of the car restarts as she turns the key in the ignition. The radio blares to life. It can't have been that loud before, she thinks, as her ears twinge and she reaches quickly to dial the volume down. She hadn't even noticed earlier when the radio had turned itself off, 10 minutes exactly from when her ignition did. That was quite a while ago now. The storm lasted longer than she thought it would. She flushes. When she gets home, he asks her, "What took so long?" She responds, "I got caught in the rain is all. No one knows how to drive in this kind of weather." She feels like a liar, but for the first time since navigating this need and all the conversations it starts, she does not feel cursed. She remembers the planning. Back when he had proposed and it was all so new, she was lightning herself back then, at least as far as her excitement went, the way she zapped decisions. She had been swept up in crafting the wedding, in folds of tulle and white garters, in champagne and cake tastings, in photographers and guest lists. 4 months before the date, they'd sat down to dinner. "Where do you want to go on the honeymoon?" he'd asked. She'd felt shell-shocked, having forgotten. She'd blurted out, "London," without even thinking about it. "You know, Big Ben, the Globe. I've always wanted to go." It was true. His face had scrunched up. "London? In February?" "Why not?" she asked, not knowing quite why it felt important. "It'd be cheap." Sure, honeymoons were supposed to be for sex and basking in the simple glory of each other's existence, but they had already gotten over that stuff. They'd been together 3 years. They'd lived together for 2 of those. There was nothing new under the sun she cared to try in the bedroom, and on those days she was honest with herself. She knew she would be bored on a traditional honeymoon. She would honestly have been concerned with herself if she'd been more interested in bedding him than museum trawling. Perhaps that was why she had put off thinking about it. She didn't want a honeymoon at all, just a vacation. "London will be nasty in February," he said. "Cold, wet." He paused. "What about the Dominican? You, me, and a beach?" He raised his eyebrows lecherously. "I suppose," she said half-heartedly. "That makes sense." And that had been the end of the discussion. They'd had 2 weeks of glorious sun. She remembered the sunrises. They'd both gotten a little too drunk most nights, and she'd look out at the waves and reckon them against his snoring. When they returned home, he'd said,
"It was a good thing we didn't do London, love. It rained the whole last 2 weeks. We would have been miserable."
Now it felt like it hadn't just been the museums she'd missed out on.
"I want to talk about something,"
he said. She responds, barely looking up from the newspaper.
"I've got a research opportunity in Texas."
"You've what?" She puts down the paper in confusion.
"I didn't think I would get it, so I didn't tell you when I applied, but I got it. Isn't that great?"
he exclaims. "So you want to go to Texas?" she asks slowly.
"I want us to go to Texas."
The joy starts to slip from his face as she does not respond. But she cannot quite formulate her words.
"Your contract is finished in 2 months, he interjects quickly. "It's great timing."
"But," she continues, "Texas?"
"I know it will be a change," he says, "but it could be fun. America is okay again. It's a 3-year position," he continues. "So if you hate it, we don't have to stay very long."
3 years? She is bewilderment. The smallness of her breath catches on what she wants to say for a moment. He nods excitedly, and she gasps, like a fish trying to turn the air into something breathable. Instead, all she can ask is, "How often does it rain in Texas?"
"What does that have to do with anything?"
he asks, confused for a moment. Then he laughs.
"You aren't still on about that, are you?"
She is still a fish without water, drowning in the dry aftermath of summer after a spring of rain, flopping around at the mouth of the storm drain. Glub, glub.
"Think about it?" he asks, smiling. "They said they'd give me a couple days to decide."
The smile shifts, turns sly, seductive.
"Maybe I can help clear your thoughts?"
He winks, pulling her upstairs. She goes because she doesn't know what else to do. Then she finds her voice again. He is on top of her. But now he isn't listening. He is thrusting, already sweaty, eyes half-lidded. She moans, the way she thinks it is supposed to sound, letting out the only noise she knows will mean anything to him in this moment. He groans, collapsing on her chest, and she stops her own noises in turn. The silence that fills the room is louder than any of the echoes. A month later, she says, "I'm sorry, I can't." She has run it over in her head 1,000 times, and now they are here, brushing their teeth in the bathroom and saying it as easy as that. Except it isn't, because he is here too, and as long as he is here, her job is to care.
"What?"
he asks, confused, indignant.
"What do you mean?"
"I don't love you anymore," she says, though it is not entirely true. Still, how can you love something that does not believe in you? She does not keep gas lights in her household, nor should she. She is sure of that much. And so, what she says is true enough when she says it.
"So you're just gonna stay here? Forever?"
His eyes grow sharp.
"You're going to leave me because of some bullshit thing you won't get therapy for?"
"No," she says. "I'm leaving too. I'm just not leaving for Texas. And it's not bullshit."
"So, where will you go?"
he asks. "I'm not sure. Somewhere that it rains," she says, calm as the air before the storm.
"You can't be serious. This is fucking—"
He cuts himself off, angry now.
"You know I tried hard. You got yours. Aren't we more than this?"
He shivers, then punches the wall.
"Fuck!"
he exclaims. She jumps, eyes wide, wary. He stares at her for a moment. If it was not time before, it is now. She knows. She has been taught better than to suffer this type of violent posturing. She shakes her head, swiftly closing the door on his ego,
and his house, and his edges melt away like sugar as she walks into the rain. He does not follow her, and she is glad. Floods have a way of making things seem far away, and she does not want to be rescued from this one. She notices the percussion in her steps, and the steady pounding of water droplets. She thinks how wonderful it would be if there was a melody to go with it. She does not get postcards from Texas, nor does she send them from Vancouver. She moved out in silence the day after that conversation, and the silence held. Her sister visited once. It was nice. Her cousin is visiting as well in a few weeks. She has found a teaching job out here. She loves her students and cannot wait to chaperone their trip to Redwood Park. If there's ever a witch's curse, ever was a reason for this quirk in her physiology, she does not care. Everyone has preferences, and so what? Hers fulfill her, and she might not have come here otherwise. She loves it here. She has always wanted to learn to play music and has finally started taking lessons. She goes twice a week to a woman named Nadine to learn to play the harp. Sometimes, when it rains, she practices. And sometimes, when it rains, she tends to other instruments instead.
And that's our story. Over on the Patreon campaign this month, we're welcoming Daughters of Delos as a brand new supporter. In addition to my abiding gratitude, Patreon supporters are currently receiving episodes of an unexpurgated, unauthorized version of a planetary romance from the beginning of the 20th century. This will be winding up shortly, so now is a great time to sign up and download the entire novel. To find out what I'm talking about, join us at patreon.com/nobilis. You have been listening to the Nobilis Erotica podcast. Theme music is composed and performed by Mass Relay. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Until next time, listen hard.